Alright, welcome back to Behavior and Environment. This is video part 2, beginning with Objective 2, lists critical attributes of behavior. And so let's begin. So the first attribute is that it consists of movement. We've talked a little bit about that with the prior definitions of behavior. Next is only a living organism can engage in behavior. We talked about that as well. So now we're going to really get into the other critical features of behavior. That is, it's observable, and we're going to go into detail in each of these in subsequent slides. It's measurable. Behavior consists of interaction with the environment. We've discussed that. And it's a biological phenomenon, so that'll be new relative to what we've discussed so far. So let's look at these in detail. So movement. Well, the organism does something. They perform an action, and this includes thoughts, feelings, and the activity of neurons. And it includes activities of the striated muscles, for example, skeletal, or what is commonly outside of behavior analysis referred to as voluntary muscles, such as coughing, and smooth muscles, also known as non-striated, outside of behavior analysis typically referred to as involuntary muscles, such as those engaged when vomiting or when your heart rate changes. And then glands, such as those that produce salivation. Now, the behavior, the other fundamental attribute is living organism, and that's behavior is a characteristic of just individual living organisms. So organisms that pass conventional tests of being alive. Groups don't behave. Groups may produce products that result from the interaction of individual group members' behavior, such as a factory and the products produced by the factory that are the result of the interaction between the behavior of many different individuals within the factory. And you can refer to the behavior as the learner or the student. It's okay to use those terms interchangeably. You may even say client in some circumstances, or patient. Okay, observable is another fundamental attribute. So at the very least, it must be observable to the behavior. That means the person engaging in the behavior at the very least must be able to observe the behavior. It's not necessary for a phenomenon to count as behavior that someone else other than the behavior is also able to observe the behavior. To establish believability in research, in clinical practice, 2 or more people must agree the behavior occurred. An observation may require advancements in technology. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But what do I mean by 2 people agreeing? So in a clinical or a teaching situation, you have someone who's implementing, let's say, an intervention or a teaching practice or the therapy using applied behavior analysis, and so they observe and repeatedly measure a certain behavior, and then they graph. They collect those data that result from the measurement, and then they graph the data and use graph data to make decisions about either continuing or changing teaching practices or the therapy or the intervention. But in those situations, we periodically assess the believability of those data by having some other independent observer come into that context and also observe the behavior and collect data. And so what you do is you assess what's called inter-observer agreement, which is the extent to which the data from those 2 observers are the same. And the extent to which they're same, let's say 90% is typically the threshold, then those data are believable. And so, and remember so as I'm talking about this, the data collected represent or indicate the occurrence of the behavior. So that's why in those circumstances you need two people. You need to compare the data from two observers to assess whether they agree that the behavior occurred. And so that can only happen when the person who's engaging in the behavior is engaging in the behavior in a way where other people can observe it. So I'll contrast that with a situation where only the behavior engaging in the behavior can observe it. So for example, I can close my eyes, and right now I'm seeing a dolphin jump out of the ocean. And then I'll open my eyes, and so I engaged in the behavior of imagining a dolphin jumping out of the ocean, but you couldn't observe that. The only reason why you would be able to describe that I engaged in that behavior is because I told you about it, because I self-reported, right? So I'm the behavior engaging in that behavior of imagining seeing a dolphin jump out of the ocean. So what I did is behavior, it's just that you can't observe it. And that's not a problem. That means whatever I did, it's still behavior because it must be observable to the behavior, and that was the case. Okay, so we have movement of a living organism that's observable, measurable. So the behavior has dimensional quantities. Okay, so it can be counted. I can close my eyes and imagine seeing a dolphin jump out of the ocean again, open my eyes, and now I've done that twice. I could count it, right? So I can say, what am I doing? Well, I'm seeing a dolphin jump out of the ocean, and now that was 3 times, right? So I'm able to count it. It's measurable. If I snap my fingers 3 times, hey, you can count that. A student writes their name on the paper, you can count that. Oh, they wrote their name on the paper once. A student raises their hand, and then raises their hand again, and raises their hand again, and raises their hand again 4 times. Well, that happened 4 times, so it's measurable. Okay. There are other dimensional quantities we'll list later. And then interaction with the environment. So behavior-environment interactions are reciprocal processes. The behavior may modify the environment in a lasting way, such as a permanent product, results, or achievement. Those are the changes, lasting changes in the environment that result from the behavior. And those terms can be used interchangeably: permanent product, results, achievements. Behavior occurs in context, and behavior cannot exist outside of an environment or outside of context. So behavior affects the environment, and in turn the environment affects the future probability of behavior through the change in behavior the change in the environment that occurred. So I'll say that one more time. A behavior occurs, it interacts with the environment. The interaction is evidenced by a change in the environment. But that change, because it was produced by the behavior, has the potential to alter the future probability of that behavior in some way. Okay, so biological phenomenon. Now, behavior is mediated by the central nervous system. And behavior-environment interactions are mediated by chemical and electrical signaling in the brain. Also, behavior has an evolutionary basis. And environmental events evoke or elicit behavior through an organism's sensory receptors. Okay, and we're gonna talk about that at length later on. The differences between evoke and elicit, and how those terms are used to refer to the effects of antecedents or the environmental events that precede behavior. And so by sensory receptors, we're talking about those receptors associated with sensory systems: vision, hearing, taste, and so forth. Alright, let's go to some ASRs. ASR 3, which of the following is not a critical attribute of behavior? A, involves interaction with the environment. B, consists of movement. C, is observable to at least 2 people. D, is a biological phenomenon. Or E, living organism. I'll give you a few more seconds. Alright, I'll close the poll. The answer here is C. Now, being observable is a critical attribute of behavior, but observable to at least two people is not. It's still observable if at least the person engaging in the behavior can observe it. So we would say that observable to at least two people is a variable attribute of behavior, not a critical or defining attribute of behavior. Objective 3 is to apply 3 tests to discriminate between examples and non-examples of behavior. The first test is the dead person test. Now I'm going to give you a couple of tests here, and if one is clearer to you than the other, then use that. And sometimes you can use both tests to raise the level of confidence that the phenomenon you're talking about is behavior. So the dead person test, and the second test is the what am I doing test, and the third test is the leave it test, and we're going to define these and give examples in the next few slides. Okay, so for the dead person test and the what am I doing test are used to determine if a phenomenon is or is not behavior. But the leave it test is used to determine if the phenomenon is behavior or the product or outcome or achievement that is the result of that behavior. So let's look at the dead person test first. If a dead person can't do it, it's behavior. If a dead person can do it, it's not behavior, so you can't teach it. And these things don't pass the test. Floating down the river. Right? A dead person can do it, so it's not behavior. You can't teach it. It doesn't pass the dead person's test. And then falling down the stairs. That doesn't pass the dead person's test. We're not talking about jumping down the stairs or something like that. We're talking about just a body falling down the stairs, right? That doesn't pass the test. A dead person could be placed at the top of a stairway, and then gravity results in them slowly starting to creep over and slide down the stairs, right? So falling down the stairs in that case is not behavior. Getting stepped on, that's not behavior. Okay. Doesn't pass the dead person's test. These do pass the dead person's test. Jumping into an inner tube in the river, or walking down the stairs, or stepping on an ant. Those pass the dead person's test. The second test is what am I doing test, and this I learned from Dr. Jose Martinez Diaz at Florida Institute of Technology and ABA Technologies. And so the way Dr. Martinez Diaz talked about this is that behavior is a specific measurable action, and there are 2 steps or 2 criteria for the what am I doing test that aren't listed here in your slide, but you should write them down. The first is the first thing you do is you ask yourself, what am I doing? And typically if you're able to say what you're doing with an ing word, then you're probably engaging in behavior. So it can be singing or dancing or walking or writing or typing, talking on the phone, driving, stuff like that. But that doesn't always work, and so the next criterion that the phenomenon has to meet is you have to be able to count it. So you ask, what am I doing? And then you ask, can I count it? If you can count it and you're doing something, it passes the what am I doing test. Okay, so these don't pass the test. Having a bad day, you cannot quantify the having a bad day. If you do count the number of bad days, you're counting bad days. You're not counting something you do or something you physically have in a literal sense. Even if you did count something that you had, it doesn't matter, that's not your behavior. We can say having a pen in my hand, or I have a pen in my hand. Well, if you count that, you're counting the pen. You're not. You can contrast that with I picked up a pen. Well, there's behavior. What am I doing? Picking up a pen. How many times did I do it? Once. Right? So that passes the test. But having a bad day doesn't pass the test. Daydreaming doesn't pass the test. It's not a specific measurable action. Losing track of time, again, not a specific measurable action. But these do pass the test. Checking my watch, imagining being on an island with a margarita, as long as there's a clear beginning and end to the imagining. And then running from the cuffs. So those do pass the test. Now here's our third test related to behavior and environment, is the Leave It test. Now this is from Gilbert in 1962 and 1978. You use this test to distinguish between behavior and the result, product, or accomplishment of behavior. And the way Gilbert said this is, quote, behavior you take with you, accomplishments you leave behind. And so these don't pass the test. Reading a book, nah, that's behavior. Okay. Thinking about the weather, that's also behavior. Seeing a killer whale jump into the air, that's behavior. These do pass the test, which means these phenomena I'm going to list are results, products, or accomplishments of behavior. A completed math worksheet, the bruise on the victim's face, a mess in the kitchen after a child spills a bag of rice. Alright, so let's go to the ASRs. ASR number 4 here. Seeing the football fly through the goalposts. Is the seeing behavior? A, yes. B, no. Give a few more seconds. Alright, I'll close the poll, and the answer here is A, yes. ASR 5, the written words bread pudding. Is it behavior? A, yes. B, no. A couple more seconds. Alright, I'll close the poll. The answer here is B, no. Writing the words would be behavior, but the written words, bread pudding, is not behavior. But that does pass the Leave It test, so the written words, bread pudding, would be the result or the product or the accomplishment of the behavior. ASR 6, hearing the professor write Pythagorean theorem on the chalkboard as you check your email. Is hearing the professor's writing behavior? A, yes. B, no. So imagine the professor's writing on the chalkboard really loudly. Give you a couple more seconds. Okay, I'll go ahead and close the poll. The answer is A, yes. ASR 7, believing in Santa. Is A, behavior, B, a result, or C, not behavior? Give you a couple more seconds. Alright, I'll close the poll, and the answer here is C, not behavior. Believing in Santa isn't observable, it's not measurable, it doesn't involve interaction with the environment, you can't count it, it doesn't pass the dead person's test, and the what am I doing tests, so yeah, it's not behavior. Okay, our next objective is objective 4, and we'll continue here in the next video part.